If you've ever been told that your struggles exist because of your thoughts, your vibration, or something that you haven't healed yet, I want you to pause with me for a moment. Because the interpretation of the world as a mirror is not just inaccurate, it's quietly doing damage. Sure, it sounds empowering on the surface, but for a lot of sincere people, it slowly turns into this belief that if my life is hard, I must be failing internally. And historically, that's not what this teaching was ever pointing at. Not at all. In early Eastern philosophy, in Stoicism, and even in contemplative Christianity, the mirror was never about blame. It was about how perception works when the inner world is calm versus agitated. So if this idea has left you constantly checking yourself, second guessing your reactions, or trying to spiritually outgrow very real human pain, then this conversation is for you. Let's clear this up. The mirror teaching does not mean that your thoughts are magically creating events. It does not mean that trauma, loss, illness, or hardship exist because you're out of alignment. And it does not mean that pain is evidence you failed spiritually. If you look at teachers like the Buddha or later Stoics like Epictetus, or even early desert mystics, none of them taught that suffering meant you were doing life wrong. They taught that suffering was inevitable, and the work was how we related to it. Modern interpretations turn responsibility into self-blame. But when blame enters the system, the nervous system tightens. And a tight nervous system doesn't learn, it protects. So if a teaching leaves you tense, ashamed, or hyper self-aware, that's not awakening. That's misunderstanding. Here's what the mirror actually reflects. Not your thoughts, not your intentions, and certainly not your worth. The world mirrors the state of your nervous system. Ancient teachers didn't have the language of neuroscience, but they absolutely observed this. And that's why practices like meditation, prayer, silence, and walking were foundational, not optional. They understood that when the inner state is settled, the world is perceived with clarity. When the inner state is agitated, the same world appears hostile, rushed, or unsafe. Same job, same relationship, same circumstances. Different internal state. Modern science now confirms a regulated nervous system sees options, nuance, and timing. A dysregulated nervous system sees threat and urgency. Reality doesn't change. Your relationship to it does. That's not manifestation. That's perception shaped by biology. So how did this teaching get so distorted? Because ancient teachings were never meant to be reduced to slogans. They were taught slowly, methodically, within community, with guidance and practice. When those ideas were pulled into modern self-help and manifestation culture, control got confused with awareness. People were taught to manage reality instead of understand their nervous system. Responsibility became blame, and regulation got skipped entirely. And here's the line that most people miss. Responsibility without regulation becomes shame. And shame, well, doesn't produce insight, produces hypervigilance, self-monitoring, endless fixing, and people don't become clearer. They become exhausted. So if the world isn't punishing you and you're not broken, what actually moves things forward? Well, here's the path. First, stabilize before you analyze. Every ancient tradition understood this. Safety always came before insight. Second, listen to sensation before story. The body reacts before the mind explains. That's why early practices trained awareness of breath and body first. And third, change your state, not your worth. Your worth was never the question, only your level of activation. This is how perception shifts. Not through fixing yourself, not through blaming yourself, but through returning to regulation. In the next video, I'll explain how to tell the difference between intuition and a dysregulated nervous system. Because ancient teachings warned us about this too, mistaking fear for wisdom and urgency for truth. And confusing the two keeps people searching for clarity they already have.